we're gearing down toward the end of the course, what we're going to actually move into are some of the foundational things from the beginning of the course. So this is chapter 2 on the communication process, and the main focus is on 3 models. So what this chapter covers is the transmission model. That is Shannon and Weaver in 1949. Then we're going to move into interaction, Schramm from 1954. And finally, the transaction by Barnland, that actually nothing's been updated in about 50 years, which is pretty interesting. So first, we'll move into the transmission model. You can think about it almost like an engine on the car. The famous example they give in the textbook is about a radio. So the main focus of this is sender to receiver, so it's very linear. The focus is absolutely on the message, and it goes into talking about 2 different types of noise. The first one is environmental. So for instance, if a car whizzes past and you can't hear something, or if you've been hearing all those firecrackers been going off for the last few months, those kinds of things can get in the way of a message. The other kind of noise is semantic. So it might be if you don't know the meaning of something. So for instance, when we were going over everything over the last week, when we were talking about thesis statements, if that was a new word for you before you watched the video and you were just looking at the informative guidelines packet, that might have been a type of noise until you saw the video. The other kind of semantic noise might be if something gets in the way of the meaning because you're distracted. So if someone says something offensive, if somebody tells you the name of someone or a place and it takes you to another place in time. So again, the transmission model is very much focused more on the sender than anyone else, and that contrasts with what we're going to be seeing later. When we talk about CMC, that stands for Computer Mediated Communication, and it's very different than the face-to-face. And the textbook gives some pretty funny examples that are actually pretty updated with autocorrect. So somebody who is sending a message about thrifting, but then it said thrusting, definitely a semantic noise. When we move into the second model on interaction, it now adds in the idea of the simultaneous sender and receiver. So it's the ongoing process. So for instance, when you're talking to someone, they might be nodding or they might do this, and it shows that somebody doesn't understand. So rather than the first model, where it was focused on the sender and the message, this one introduces much more about the ongoing process with the receiver. The idea of the feedback. So it might be that someone says something verbally. Again, it might be by the body language. When we talk about the physical and psychological context, those are the things that matter that also might get in the way of a message, or it might make something better. So you might have rearranged parts of your bedroom as you started working more remotely or in an online class. It might be when you take a phone call, it might be easier or harder based on where you are. When we talk about the psychological context, that might be, if you're trying to concentrate and then you get text messages that are distracting you. It might be that you just got called into work, or maybe your hours just got cut. So when we're bringing in new context for this, all of these things come into consideration. And then it's going to be contrasted with a third model, which again, interestingly, it's the most updated one, but it's from 1970, which is actually 3 years before I was born. So I always say either we nailed it or we need some more communication scholars in the mix so we can update the model. So what's different in this final model is rather than have sender and receiver, it's changed now to communicator and communicator, because we're always sending messages back and forth. And usually in updated textbooks, that's actually the only one that we'll see. Rather than sender and receiver, we'll see communicator and communicator. In addition to having the physical and the psychological context, now we add the social, relational, and cultural. So for instance, in the social, those stated or unstated norms. So this might be either in a face-to-face class or in an online class, what the expectations are for discussion. In relational, well, maybe you're going to be in a class next semester and you recognize some names of people who are online. You remember somebody commented to you. Those kinds of things always matter in a context. Or if you go into work and you recognize someone from another job who was on your shift. That's what we mean by the previous interpersonal relationship. In terms of cultural, we had a whole chapter on that. So when all these things come into focus, this is how we always perceive any kind of interaction. So whether it's through the lens of race and gender, nationality, and all the things that go along with it. So this is the most updated one, and I challenge anyone if you want to come up with a fourth model. It's been 50 years since it happened. Enjoy the rest of the day.